What's going on, everybody? You are here at the place of worship. I know it is Sunday. We're not talking about church. We're talking about college football, Big Ten West, baby. I am your host with the most, the point guard of podcasting, the college football GOAT himself, Guns Picks, and I am joined once again by the man, the myth, the legend. You can find him on wagertalk.com. Bryan Power, what's going on, my friend? How you doing this beautiful Sunday?
Doing great. One division down, one more to go. We teased it last time out. I think this is the more interesting division to break down in the Big Ten, even though it's, the less marquee division. It does not have the two brand names of the conference. We talked about Ohio State, Michigan yesterday. At least you did mostly. I had a little technical difficulty in the middle of that. But look, everybody knows both those teams are good. But what they need to know today, Guns, is the top two teams in the West are also very good. And unlike Ohio State, Michigan, I think there is plenty of value on those top two out west. And I cannot wait to get into that, as well as the other five teams as well.
Yeah, I think this side of the conference is going to give a little bit more competition to the other side when they do meet up. I'm actually excited to do break this thing down, but we have to get the mood right? So we have to just get it going a little bit. Get the juices flowing. Get the goosebumps going. Woo! Let's get it going here. Oh, my God.
I think Vern Lundquist just walked through my door.
He did. Yes. Yeah, get him in here.
Yeah.
Let's hear him say unblocked, or I think that was the color commentator used to say that and used to drive me nuts. Unblocked. It's like, is that a word? All right, so we're going to start this off low-hanging fruit on this one. Got to talk about some of the bad teams in this side of the conference. And we're going to start this off with the Northwestern Wildcats. As you know, 1-11 yesterday. The only game they won was in Dublin, Ireland, against a woeful Nebraska Cornhuskers, which everybody thought was going to be good. Turns out they weren't. 12 starters back on this one, 4 on the offensive side, 8 on the defense. Pat Fitzgerald, the head coach, 28th toughest schedule. A lot of stuff going on with the program right now. That's an aside, but I'll start with you, Bryan. What do you think of Northwestern?
Well, because of these reports that are coming out and Fitzgerald being suspended, right, kind of everything is on hold with me. Now, this is not a team I was going to rush to bet anyway. Now, normally you see a program like Northwestern, who's been good in the past. They dropped down to their nadir last year, just one win, as you mentioned. And everyone's going to expect there's got to be some sort of natural bounce back, right? You're not going to see a minus 19 turnover margin again. You would think the defense with 8 starters back is going to be better. The defense, traditionally pretty good under Fitzgerald, but boy, howdy. I mean, these reports, it's not good. Pat Fitzgerald may lose his job before the season starts. We don't know. So it's a team I'm not rushing to bet. You mentioned their only win last year was that wacky game in Dublin against Nebraska, a game where they were like a big dog too going, because Nebraska everyone thought was going to bounce back last year, but Scott Frost was a disastrous hire. We'll get into that later. Northwestern, the numbers are ugly. Guns, they've lost 17 of 18 games overall. They've won 3 or fewer each of the last 3 full seasons, so that excludes the COVID year of 2020. I'm talking 2019, 2021, 2022, and based on that, you got to wonder if this investigation gets dicey. Is Fitzgerald worth keeping, given the recent state of the program? I mean, just 4 starters back from an offense that put up only 13.8 points per game. I know they were excited about bringing Ben Bryant, a quarterback from Cincinnati, but what a mess. What a mess here. I don't know what I want to do with this team. All I can tell you is I am certainly not going to be in a rush to bet them anytime soon.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on this one. I don't know where this team's going to be going. I don't know what you're going to be looking at week 1 with this team. I know they do, like you said, brought in Ben Bryant, which is a positive to the team, but they do lose their top running back in Evan Hall. He's gone. So I don't know where the production with the running game is going to be going. On the wide receiver end, they do add some transfers to improve that group there. But only 2 starters back on the offensive line. But, that was a questionable line at best last season. On the defensive side, they do get the 4 top tacklers back. But lo and behold on this one, and and everything that's encompassed with this team, you just have to wait and see what's going on with this program. I think this is a week-to-week team. This is nothing that I would even spend a dime on the futures. And quite frankly, you can't because they took them off the board anyways. So toughest games on their schedule. They do get a relatively favored schedule. Granted, it is the 28th toughest schedule on the board in the nation. Penn State, Maryland, Iowa, neutral field, and then they go to at Wisconsin. But even with the upgrade at the quarterback, running back depth is in question, and then the whole program is just probably not even focused on football right now. So this is just one that, just let it pass by, and you could be maybe, depending on whether or not Pat Fitzgerald's there or not in the beginning of the season, this team is probably at the bottom of the Big Ten West. So.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I know that some of the players, I believe, came out in defense of Fitzgerald. We don't know. I mean, when you see a decline like what we've seen, though, you got to wonder, does Fitzgerald really have the locker room or not? I want to talk about the schedule because you mentioned it's 28th hardest. Man, this is not a great schedule. I only have them favored in 2 games, I think. At home against UTEP on September 9th, and then they'll face FCS Howard in October. Other than that, I mean, they have to go to Rutgers. We talked about this yesterday, right? You don't want these bad teams don't want their quote unquote winnable games on the road. Well, they have to go to Rutgers. They have to go to Duke. They have to go to Nebraska. And in the end of October, beginning of November, 3 straight weeks, Northwestern will play a opponent off a bye. That is not great. So I don't know. Maybe there's 2, maybe 3 wins here, but not any more than 3.
Right. I guess if they do put it back on the board, I think it was at 3.5 or 4 or something like that. I like the under on that one, but like you said, if they're going to be favored in 2 games and they're really an FCS team and of course a non P5 team, it's really not worth looking at. Who knows? I mean, this team may huddle up together in adversity and give themselves a season, but I'm not seeing any hopes for Pat Fitzgerald's folks. Moving on to a team that frustrated everything out of me yesterday or last season. I thought this team was on the up and up. I was really if you watch my preview last season, I was all over. I was like, Nebraska's going to be so good. They brought in Casey Thompson. This team, it has a lot of experience. They lost most of their games by a possession or less in 2021, and this team just laid an egg. Scott Frost gets fired immediately, but hopes are back with Matt Rule under coaching the team in Lincoln, Nebraska. 15 starters back too. 7 on the offense, 8 on the defense, 4-8 last season, 3-6 in the conference, 51st toughest schedule. Is Nebraska back? I'll pass it to you, Brian. What do you think?
Like back where they were in their heyday? No, absolutely not. Can they make a bowl game in Rule's first season? Yes, they can. Also, interesting to note, when we broke down the East yesterday, not a single first-year head coach in that division. Here in the West, we've got 3 first-year head coaches, and that doesn't even include what may or may not happen with Northwestern. Rule in his first season with at Temple and at Baylor, he won a total of just 3 games. Remember, that situation he stepped into at Baylor was dire. I mean, that was a ugly scene in Waco. It's not nearly as dire here. This team was, I'm totally on board with you. This was a team that the metrics, when people look at like those sticky metrics that like can be variable from year to year, everybody at this time last year thought Nebraska was going to be an improved team in 2022. They laid that egg in Dublin. That set the tone. Frost got fired. Frost was just a horrible hire. He had problems, off the field. So I like the hire as the head coach. I don't like his offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield, a lot. He was not great at South Carolina, and I wonder if that limits what we see from the Cornhuskers. But this is a team that has had the worst close game luck probably in the last 2 years. So there naturally should be an improvement. Rule hit the transfer portal hard. You got Jeff Sims coming over from Georgia Tech at quarterback. Their ceiling is making a bowl game this year. I mean, it's like, and I think isn't the win total 6, as a matter of fact? I believe
6.5. Yeah.
Okay,
So Okay.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about that. I don't feel really confident that he can do that because I think at best this is the 5th best team in the division.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know. I think in a couple of years Nebraska could be a player, but not in 2023.
Yeah, you mentioned close games. Even as bad as Nebraska was last year, they had 5 close losses last year within a possession. So that, I mean, they're still in the same boat, just the worst luck there. But like Casey Thompson, we have to check on his health because I don't think he's alive. After I watched him against the Oklahoma game where he just got murdered over and over again, I thought he'd be drinking out of a straw the rest of his life. But the offensive line is an aside right now. Jeff Sims does take over the role. Dual threat weapon, did perfectly productive quarterback at Georgia Tech. The running back situation, they get back their top rusher, Anthony Grant. He had just under 1,000 yards rushing last season, 4.2 yards per carry, which is pretty good with a bad line. But the depth kind of drops off for there. So, and when you know Matt Rule's type of strategy, he likes to run the ball a lot. So there may be a shift in the dynamic of the offense there. So they're going to need running backs to kind of step up into that role. Wide receiver wise, depleted, losing 4 out of their 5 top receivers from last year. They do add some depth in the transfer portal and actually get a guy that I hadn't heard from in a year or two, Billy Kemp from UVA, going over there to Nebraska. He was a productive wide receiver for them, and I think he's one of the top receivers as far as yards and receptions is concerned over at UVA. He's at least top 5. O-line, humongous problem. They do lose 2 starters from last season, but they get some solid transfers from UGA and Arizona State. So there's no way to go but up with this offensive line. They gave up 33 sacks, 9.7 sack rate last year. So they got to improve overall. On the defensive side, 1 starter back on the defensive line. Linebacker unit should be solid, and they get a transfer from UGA. And then you got the D-backs, all 4 starters back for them, including their number 2 and 4 tacklers. Plus, they get a solid transfer from Florida to help with the depth. So that's going to be a solid unit. Toughest games for them, they have to go to Illinois, to Wisconsin, but they get Michigan, Maryland, and Iowa at home. And I was interested. This is one of the ones that I was considering taking a win total. I was like, they can't be over 5 wins. But when I saw the number at 6.5, I was like, it's not something that I'm willing to take. I think this is like at best a 6-win team. If they can get the 6 wins on this one, I think that's a win for Matt Rule in terms of building the team for the future. I think right now he's just trying to, put duct tape on a dam right now, trying to not make the whole thing crumble over so he can actually build his foundation together. But overall, one of the lower teams in the division. I'm not paying attention to him this year. I learned my lesson last year. We'll just see what Matt Rule can do with this team.
I feel extremely comfortable projecting a 5th place finish in this division. More than any team, I think, in this entire conference, like picking where they finish in the division, I am very confident Nebraska finishes 5th in this division. One spot I may look to back them, Guns. Week 2 at Colorado. I don't know how much you've paid attention to this, but and there's such a debate, on Twitter over just how valuable those betting percentages are when people tell you, oh, this is like the most popular team at such and such sports book. Well, have you seen what some of these sports books are saying about how much people are betting Colorado because of Deion Sanders? That's crazy.
Yes.
And I think you're going to get what is that number for Nebraska and Colorado? Because I'm telling you, I think Nebraska is going to be a great value in their second game. They'll have a few extra days to prepare because their season opener at Minnesota is on a Thursday. Colorado's going to be coming off the game against TCU. I think that's going to be a great spot to fire on Nebraska.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I think people are just looking at prime time being the coach over at Colorado, but look how many people just left the program because he's the coach there, and they're just he's basically just trying to get depth and bringing in transfers just to keep everything together. But more often than not, he's not bringing in like P5 talent into these situations. I think this team is a little bit overvalued in my opinion.
I think they're projected for 3.5 wins, Colorado.
Is it three? They're 3.5 wins.
Yeah, but everyone like loves this team. Like I think they are going to be like the squarest, most public dog against TCU in that first game. I know this is a Big Ten discussion. We're veering all over the country here, but Colorado is going to be a huge public dog against TCU in the season opener. And I think Colorado's a team to fade, and that will be a good, especially if Nebraska loses to Minnesota in that first game. That'll make me want to fire on them more in Boulder against Colorado in week 2.
Yeah, I think that's a good spot to look at. I'm interested what the line. What was it? Is there a line?
I don't have a look ahead in front of me. Somebody who maybe is not doing a podcast right now could look that up while they're listening and find it. But regardless what the number, I kind of have an idea. And yeah, I like Nebraska in that spot.
Yeah, Chris Brady in the chat putting up some future long shots on this one. He thinks he likes Michigan 10-1. Michigan getting back to the playoff and a three-peat, that's a tough take, but
it is.
I'll give it to you. Oregon, we'll have to look at them. We're gonna look at the Pac-12 next week with Mark Zeno.
My good buddy.
Yeah, we all know Mark, so he's gonna be breaking that down. So we'll dive into the Pac-12 next week. But Bryan just brought up a good point, and this is on me. I had my notes not far enough down, and we skipped a very important team that's in transition on this one. We're going to go to them now, and we're going to talk Purdue Boilermakers. A lot of turnover. Speaking of teams in a little bit of a reset, the Purdue Boilermakers, Jeff Brom leaving to go to Louisville. Ryan Walters does take over for the team. Not a lot of head coaching experience because he was a defensive coordinator. And they also have one of the toughest schedules in the country, 5th toughest. With only 11 starters back, 6 on the offensive side, 5 on the defense. This team was 8-6, 6-3 in the conference. But you have to understand, this is a new regime. A lot of turnover in this one. But some interesting transfers came in. What are your thoughts on the Purdue Boilermakers?
Well, let's not bury the lead. This team won the division last year. How many people remember that they represented the West in the Big Ten championship game? They covered against Michigan. Or no, they didn't. They were covering almost the whole way and then didn't. That's right. But again, it's a first-year coach. It looks like a clear rebuilding year there. Only 11 starters back, first-year coach. There's not a lot to, they're going to finish. I've got them finishing above Northwestern, but the problem is that it used to be that you could take advantage of something like this. People, they'll be like, oh, hey, this team won the division last year. And odds make, I don't know, people were just not as cognizant of regression as they were a few years ago as they are now. But everyone knows this team's going to regress. And I don't think there's a lot of value betting Purdue under its season win total now. They're obviously taking a step back, but we all know that. And I don't know. I just think it's a team that's obviously going to win less games, but there's not a ton of value in their season win total or, who knows what we'll see in terms of a game-by-game basis moving forward. But, yeah, it's an obvious team that drops and wins is I guess, the long and short of it.
Yeah. And the over and under on them is 5.5. So basically you're saying, is this team going to be winning a bowl, getting to a bowl or not? It's going to be tough, but I do think the positive is, Aiden O'Connell was a quarterback last year for Purdue, a great quarterback, but they get a good, solid transfer in Hudson Card. And I think Hudson Card is just getting bad luck over and over again on the draws because he is a really solid quarterback. When he did play for Texas, 65% completion rate, 11 touchdowns, 2 INTs last year. So I think the level of quarterback is almost at the same level as Aiden O'Connell, but not, I can't take away from what he did as a quarterback at Purdue. And plus the changeover in the offense could affect his production as well. Going into the running backs, they get back their top 2 rushers, including Devin Mockabee, who is a 1,000-yard rusher for them. So they should be on par in the running game, and who knows how that offense is going to be. They may need to use him a little bit more. Wide receivers, which is Brom's specialty. You usually got solid receivers to help with that offense, but with the changeover, I don't know if that's going to stay up to par. They lose Charlie Jones from last year, 1,361 yards receiving. The O-line, losing 3 starters, but they get some transfers with starting experience to build the depth. They'll have more experience overall than they did last year. but it's under a new scheme, so I don't really know how that's going to affect the offense altogether. Defense, they bring back 7 out of their 10 defensive linemen with playing experience, so I don't think there's going to be a drop off there. But I never really consider Purdue like a solid defense altogether.
Although, if I could just jump in real quick, it's Walters. That's his pedigree. I mean, Illinois, where he came from and was the DC, they had one of the best defenses in the country last year. It's not going to happen overnight,
Right.
this defense, but over time, it'll be interesting to see, like, if we start to see an identity shift with this Purdue program, if Walters can be successful.
Yeah, Walters, he was defensive coordinator for Illinois. You know what he did there. Solid defense last year. Great numbers, too. And then you got Missouri. He came over from Missouri as well. So he does, that is his specialty. You are correct. So I think over time, this defense I think it's going to be a little bit of a shift to more of the Big Ten style of offense to defense ratio that was left when Braum was just like, let's just air it out and like just try to outscore teams. Linebackers on this one, 3 starters back for them and a good prospect too, Nick Carraway. So look for that name out there. He's going to be solid for them. And the D-backs really, they lose their number 1 tackler, which is every time I see a D-back as the number 1 tackler, I'm like, oh, yes, that's a bad defense. Inexperienced unit on the D-backs altogether, but with Ryan Walters, I think he'll develop them well. So they do have a new OC as well. He came over from West Virginia and USC. Those are his previous teams. I don't know if that's going to link up to the dynamic of what the Purdue offense was. Probably going to be a little bit of a switch over there. More defensive focus in the offense is what I have in my notes here. Going to be a full reset. And what you see for the number 5.5, you're trying to say, is this a bowl team or is this not a bowl team? They do have a lot of tough road games. They have to go to Virginia Tech, a tough place to play, at Iowa, at Michigan, and they're reluctant to get Wisconsin and Ohio State at home. But I don't see victories in really any of those situations. So I think this is going to be a real rebuilding year for Purdue, and then we'll see what happens to them in the future.
Yeah, including, I mean, obviously because they made the Big Ten championship, they played an extra game. But I mean, this team that lost 6 games last year, including the Big Ten and then the bowl, they just waved. They were one of the teams that waved the white flag, if you remember, because the coaching and they got annihilated. Like, remember, they just couldn't make that spread high enough against LSU, and then Purdue still loses 63-7. So yeah, it's a 6-loss team that's going to be worse. So yeah, I'm not rushing either way to bet that win total again.
Yeah, I agree with this one. Moving on. We're going to Minneapolis, Minnesota, playing with the Golden Gophers here. Last season, great season for them, 9-4, 6-3 in the conference. 13 returning starters, 4 PJ Fleck, 7 on the offense, 6 on the defensive side, and they got one of the toughest schedules in the country. Number 7 ranked on this one. Very tough, and a lot of them are road games. Unfortunately, the big teams they got to play. And some changeover in the offense, some new faces you'll see here. And basically, PJ Fleck went to the transfer portal and he went back to his old row the boat days, brought in some guys on this one, but we'll talk about them in a second. I'll pass it to you, Brian. What do you think of Minnesota?
Well, I'll tell you this. Minnesota, the last 3 non-COVID seasons, so again, you take out 2020, they've gone 29-10. And won a bowl each of those 3. This has been a successful program. I think the whole row the boat thing's a little cheesy. I don't love PJ Fleck, to be honest, but he's done a good job here. I mean, this is not, a banner program in the conference, but Minnesota, it looked like they were one of the better teams in the division last year. That they come up short. They had the loss to Iowa down the stretch. I mean, last year, that Big Ten West, it seemed like every week, there was a new team that, okay, you're like, this is who's going to win the division. And then Purdue wound up winning it. But look, you brought up the schedule. That's not a good thing for them. It's a tougher schedule than last for sure. Whenever you draw both Michigan and Ohio State and you're a team for the Western Division, that's not good. They also have to go to Iowa and North Carolina in the non-conference. 5 of the 12 defenders from last year that had 300-plus snaps are gone. They tried to attack the back end in the secondary with a lot of transfers. The receiving group looks good on offense. You mentioned going back to his Western, the row your boat days. Sean Tyler comes over from Western Michigan as a running back. So they did a good job of the transfer portal. I think they're in a battle with Illinois for 3rd place for sure. what's the win total? Because we've seen some movement and discrepancy on the win total, right?
I see 7.5. That was the line that I saw.
I don't know, man. Considering they've won 9 or more the last 3 non-COVID years, that does seem a little low even with the schedule. I mean, if you say, okay, let's say they lose to Michigan, they lose to Ohio State. I mean, they lose to North Carolina, they lose at Iowa, and then there's Wisconsin. So I guess, I mean, that there is 5 losable games here, for sure. But I don't know. There might be a little value on the over because Fleck can pull an upset. At least if he pulls an upset in one of those, they're in good shape. They're going to go 8-4.
Yeah. If he can pull an upset, I'm not sure if with this changeover that he's going to. I was looking at more of the when you talk about the offense for Wisconsin, you've seen the main pillars for that has been Tanner Morgan and Ibrahim
for Minnesota.
For Minnesota. So when you break that down and look at who the replacements are, they have this guy called the Greek gunslinger. He's actually the first dual threat quarterback the Gophers probably have ever had. He has mobility. He did have some playing experience, but when he went in there, he wasn't like a dynamic passer. He only had 54% pass completion rate. Don't make me say this guy's name. It's Ethan Kaliamanis. I think that's I'm probably mispronouncing that, but I'll let the announcers on the Big Ten Network try to figure that one out. The running backs on this one, Bryan already talked about it. Sean Taylor does come in, 1,000-yard rusher for them, 5.7 yards per carry. Very solid there. Replacement for Ibrahim. And top 2 wide receivers are back for them as well. But this wasn't a star unit altogether for the wide receivers. Only 2 returning starters on the offensive line. This is a group that only allowed 15 sacks last year, 4.6 yards per carry to their rushers. So there's going to be some big shoes to fill. They do get a nice transfer guard from Notre Dame that should help out with the help that unit. And they also got a senior center to kind of step in as well. So there is experience from that unit. Defensively, defensive line's got to improve. They never really put pressure on the quarterback last year. They only had 4 sacks as a unit. So they only have 2 returning starters there. So we'll see if their replacements can actually step up and actually, put pressures on the quarterback in the Big Ten. They do lose a lot on the linebacker core. They do add another row the boat guy, West Virginia top linebacker for them, Ryan Seelig. So maybe the production does increase there. Defensive backs, their top corner and safety gone from the NFL. They do get a transfer from Georgia Southern to help out with the void. But overall, I think that's going to be a key point to kind of build on that one. The secondary is definitely a downgrade for sure. Toughest games, I talked about it, at UNC. Then they got Michigan at home, at Iowa, at Ohio State, and they get Wisconsin at home. I went through the schedule 3 or 4 times, and I could only count 7 wins for them, in my opinion. And I was counting Illinois as one of those wins, and that could be a coin flip, in my opinion.
Sure.
So I know this team has consistently got 8 or 9 wins this season under PJ Fleck, or they figured it out. But when I see the number kind of dip, not to 8, not to 8.5, or something like that, it seems to me that they're seeing what could be regression in Minnesota, especially this season. I don't really trust the quarterback situation. I need to see a little bit more of him. I know he can run and move with his feet, but I'm not sure if he can get the ball downfield. That could be tough against some good Big Ten defenses, and he could struggle there in his development. I actually have this as one of my picks here. I'm gonna take under on 7.5 wins on this one. I just don't think. I think Minnesota's in a regression mode here. Set 13 starters back, and PJ Fleck just basically calling Western Michigan for help to fill in the void. It doesn't bode well for me. I think this is going to be a regression year for the Gophers.
Just a couple things to tie up on this. Defensively last year, this team was incredible. They only gave up 13.8 points per game. Only 2 teams scored more than 20, but that was last year. And I think the schedule is sort of the interesting conversation to have here. Here were 8 of Minnesota's 9 wins last year, okay? New Mexico State, Western Illinois, Colorado, Michigan State, Rutgers, Nebraska, Northwestern.
Okay.
So they had a favorable schedule last year, did they not? Last game of the year, they do go to Madison and win to pick up another win. But remember, Wisconsin had kind of like a lame duck coaching situation there too. So it is a big difference with the schedule this year, having to go to Chapel Hill out of conference, having Michigan and Ohio State on the schedule where neither were. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting for sure.
Yeah,
Let's see.
Wisconsin going to Minnesota in a revenge spot. I don't think that bodes well for Minnesota at all. And I think if Wisconsin did win that game, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they would have been in the Big Ten championship.
They would have. It was like we said earlier. It just was like a rotating thing where every week, a team had that division title right in front of them, let it slip through their grasp.
And I was hoping they would, because I thought it would have been a great spot to take Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship against Michigan. I was kind of praying for that. Didn't happen, and I was like, this Purdue line is going to stink. I think it was like 15.5 or 16 when it came out. But moving on to the hat that I'm wearing right now, let's go to Brett Bielema's group in Champaign, Illinois. 35 toughest schedule this year. He gets 12 starters back from last season, 6 on the offensive side, 6 on the defensive side. 8-5 team last year, but they lose their heartbeat of their offense and Chase Brown, and they lose a quarterback, Tommy DeVito, but I don't think that's a bigger loss than Chase Brown. But I'll start with you on this one, Brian. Illinois fighting the Illini. What are your thoughts?
And they lose Walters to Purdue, their defensive coordinator. This may have been the division's best team last year, although they did not obviously go to the Big Ten championship game. They faltered down the stretch a little bit in Champaign. They lost 3 in a row before closing the regular season out with a win over hapless Northwestern. Interesting note here. Last 3 times Illinois has had a winning season, they had a losing season the following year. They have not had back-to-back winning seasons in some time. Now, I think Bielema was doing a good job here. He does have the most returning all-conference players returning. Yeah. With 10. So there's some quality players there, even though they lost some quality players. I think he did a pretty decent job in the transfer portal. The front 7 on the defensive side of the ball should again be solid. They rebuilt the secondary. I just think, though, you look at this to me is more of a regression candidate than Minnesota. And I think these teams are kind of projected in the same, with the same. Now, I think what's Illinois' win total? Isn't it the same as Minnesota, or is it like a half game lower?
I don't have it in front of me. I'll look that up. Hold on.
Okay. Sorry about that. But regardless, they're pretty close. I think Illinois is more of a regression because, we just talked about what Minnesota's defense did last year. Illinois, their defensive numbers, they gave up 12.8 points per game. That's not going to happen. They're not going to be plus 15 in turnover margin again. Turnover ratio, obviously, Guns, you know this, in football year to year can be so variable. So I do not see Illinois matching last year's 8 wins for sure. Although I think Bielema, has this program at least on the right trajectory where they can have more consistent success than they had, under, Lovie Smith, who was stealing a paycheck all those years.
Line is 6.5 on this one, which I think is interesting. Yeah, that's lower than what Minnesota's getting. Minnesota's 7.5. What I'm seeing here is there's going to be some turnover here in the quarterback. Tommy DeVito did a good job, but he was more of just a game manager than anything else, and just kind of letting Chase Brown do whatever he did on the offensive side. They get Luke Altmaier from Ole Miss, and they also got John Paddock from Ball State. So there is who's going to be the starter on this one. I think everybody's leaning on Luke Altmaier from Ole Miss, but we'll see how that goes. Major shoes to fill on the running back side. You're missing 1,643 rushing yards last year in Chase Brown. He's going to be replaced by Reggie Love, who had 4.6 yards per carry last season as a freshman. And they also get Josh McCray back from injury as well to kind of build in that depth. But between those two guys, there's just going to be humongous shoes to fill. What Chase Brown brought to that offense, not only in the passing game and then in the receiving, the running game, that's going to be a huge, huge loss for them. They do bring back their top 2 wide receivers last season in Isaiah Williams and Pat Bryant. On the O-line returning starters, they have 2 NFL prospects on that offensive line from the 3 returning starters. They have a young center, and they dipped into JUCO to kind of fill in the other starting voids in the offensive line. But it is Bielema, and that's kind of what his signature. That shouldn't be a concern for Illinois. And then you mentioned on the defensive side, they were solid last year, 28 sacks, 3.3 yards per carry held for rushing, and they have 2 dynamic defensive ends that are back and all Big Ten guys. So they only had to replace their nose guard. So I think that unit's going to be solid up front. And then a lot of depth on the linebacker side as well. So that whole front's going to be really solid. And they also get their top tackler back as well for the linebackers. The D-backs, they lost a lot, and they lost their top cover guy, and they lost their strong safety and their full safety. So it's going to be a brand new group as far as the secondary is concerned. And this was a secondary that was awesome last year, right? So they had they only held their opponents to 51.3 pass completion rate, only 9 touchdowns, 24 INTs. So that was a signature for Illinois last year on that tough defense. Plus, you lose your defensive coordinator, so that's going to be a tough spot for them. Tough games for them at Maryland, at Iowa, at Kansas. I don't know if I haven't looked at Kansas yet. I don't know if they're going to be as tough as they are last year, but
well, here's the interesting thing: there's no Ohio State or Michigan here on the schedule, which is, if you're comparing Illinois vis-a-vis Minnesota, that's an edge to the Fighting Illini. But the non-conference schedule here is not easy. They've got Toledo, Kansas, and FAU. I think FAU is going to be pretty good with Tom Herman, leading the charge now. And yeah, I mean, Kansas is hard to protect, and Toledo is always like the top MAC team, and is a little bit more dangerous as a dog than they are. They're like a disaster as a favorite under Jason Candle. But those aren't easy games. They did not schedule a layup non-conference game, and you got to wonder, even with no Ohio State or Michigan on the schedule, does that kind of hurt them? They'll be in a bowl for sure.
Right.
The 6.5 does, I guess, that's a fair number. I don't know. I mean, I guess I could see 7 wins here.
Right.
I could.
And if you remember from last year with Illinois, they were 7-1 in their first 8 games, and they dropped to 1-4. So I don't know if that drop off is going to carry over to this year. They kind of benefited on the turnover ratios. That kind of what excelled them in a lot of their victories. And like I said, they lose a lot of key components to the secondary that was getting those INTs for them and getting those turnovers. So I don't know if that's going to carry over to this year. To me, it seems like this team's regressing. That 6.5. It's definitely not a pick on my end. I think there is a path for them to get 7. I think there's a path for them to get 5. So I don't know where it's going to land on that one. So it's more of a wait and see. Maybe there's a few spots we can just take them on a straight bet rather than try to hit a future on them. Now we're going into some juicy ones here. The top 2 teams in the West, and this team, as I'm reading about them and I started researching them, I'm loving them a lot more. The Iowa Hawkeyes this year, 8-5 last year with one of the worst offenses I've ever seen in the entire history of college football. But they kind of predicated everything on a tremendous defense that Iowa always brings to the table. 16 returning starters, 9 on the offensive side, 7 on the defense, and they get a favorable schedule this season. Number 69, toughest schedule on the board. What are your thoughts on the Hawkeyes, Bryan?
Yeah, this is going to be pretty true. So our good friend CT Bets, Chris Thurston, this is his favorite season win total. Iowa, he was banging the drum over 7.5. I think it's since moved to 8. He still loves that. And I concur with him. Now, you talked about the offensive woes. In their 5 losses last year, this is a team that averaged only 10.8 points, just 3.6 yards per play, and turned it over about 3 times per game in those 5 losses. I don't like that. Kirk Ferentz has been there forever, right? Since, I was in college. But I don't like the nepotism with the offensive coordinator. But they do bring in Cade McNamara, which theoretically should be, from Michigan, which should be a big upgrade. The tight end as well is a big upgrade. The defense, is going to be fantastic. This is a team that lost 2 games last year despite giving up 10 points or less. Like, that is how inept the offense was. I just ran through the numbers. They lost to Iowa State 10-7. They lost at Illinois 9-6. So they won 8 games. There's no way they're not going to be better. This is, I think, one of the best season win totals to bet. I think Iowa's absolutely worth a look. Betting them to win the division. I think you should sprinkle a little bit on them, maybe to win the conference as well, because you're going to get better odds now than you will probably in a 1-game situation. So, yeah, I really like Iowa. It is a 2-horse race in the Big Ten. We'll get to the other horse here in a minute, but love Iowa. Love what they're doing. You just hope. It's interesting. We're talking about Wisconsin versus Iowa as the 2 teams that will win. One of those will win the division. And it's going to come down, I think, to offense. That's not something we're used to talking about with Wisconsin and Iowa. But as long as Iowa gets some improvement out of their offense, and how could it not? It's an easy 8 wins. No Ohio State or Michigan on the schedule.
Yes, and that's I circled that right on my notes. I'm like, that's the key point on this one. Tremendous upgrade at quarterback. You just mentioned it. Cade McNamara does come over. Great, he early transfer commit for Iowa on this one from Michigan. Definitely a productive quarterback with some mobility. They get rid of Spencer Petras, that thank God, because he was terrible last year. 56% pass completion rate, 5 touchdowns, 5 INTs. He basically just handed the ball off, and then he went to play action, tried to throw it to the tight end. That was their offense altogether. Running backs on this one, top 2 rushers are back. Caleb Johnson, solid runner, 5.2 yards per carry last season, and LaShawn Williams. So I see this unit improve, even though they didn't really do anything other than keep what was there from before. Now you got the wide receivers on this one. They get their top wide receiver back, plus they get 3 receivers in the transfer portal with experience. So I think the unit's definitely improved on the wide receiver side, so that checks the box there. Offensive line was kind of not great for them last season. They gave up 38 sacks, 2.9 yards per carry allowed to their rushing. This year they get all the starters back, but they add some talent in the transfer portal to build in the depth. So hopefully they can get the line straightened out so they can protect Cade McNamara. And then the OC is I've just put the OC as a concern. Brian Ferentz, I don't know if he's going to be the guy there. And especially when you have a dynamic guy like Cade McNamara, is he capable of making him good, or is he hold him back? I don't know.
I don't know if you saw this. They put some really laughable goals. Like Ferentz, he can get like bonuses in his contract if he hits certain measures of offense, and it's not hard. It's basically it's embarrassing. Like what they're like, oh, if you hit this, such and such, this, you'll get a bonus in your contract, and he should easily be able to do that. So I don't know. I mean, it's a situation. It's the coach's son. What are you going to do? You just hope that doesn't hold this team back. By the way, Iowa's plus 280 to win this division. That's crazy. I think
crazy. That's a crazy value. I would definitely take a sprinkle on that one for sure. And then you go in the defense on this one, which is their bread and butter. They should be in good shape on the D line. The tremendous front last year. They only gave up 2.8 yards per carry on the ground, and they had 35 sacks versus their opponents. Linebacker corps will be a little bit downgraded because they lose their top 2 linebackers from last year, and Campbell and Benson, who their number 1 and 2 tacklers. Even with those losses, they seem to always find the next guy up, and plus they get a solid transfer in Nick Jackson from UVA. So I think even in the infield, there'd be a little bit of a regression for them, but I don't think much with Iowa because I always trust that defense. D-backs on this one, they do lose Moss and Merriweather, but they get back 3 guys with a lot of playing experience. So even on the coverage side, they should be okay there. And I just look at their schedule. Like I said, 69th toughest in the country. They have 2 tough road games at Wisconsin, at Penn State. And every time I went down the board over and over again, I kept seeing 10 wins. And then you have them here. And I the line that I saw, and maybe it moved up, and maybe there's a book that has it at 8. I saw it on FanDuel at 8.5. And I thought that was fine because I felt this was a 10-win team altogether. No question to me.
Yeah.
And I like
7.5 was way too low. I can't believe they opened it at 7.5.
Yeah, and of course it got pushed up. I think it's sitting at. I mean, I have it at 8.5. You may be able to find an 8 out there. I think it's great value even at 9. I think this is a 10-win team altogether, no question. Get the offense straight. Don't screw it up, Bryan. Not you, Bryan.
Yeah,
parents. and get this offense moving, because you have a great defense, and
Okay.
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, 7 straight years under 20 points per game. It might even be more. I just only have numbers that go back 7 years. So, you know you're going to get a good defense. You know you're going to get good special teams. Here's what's crazy. I mentioned those incentives. Brian Ferentz gets a bonus if this offense averages 25 points per game. Now, they only averaged 18. They averaged less than 18 last year, one of the worst marks in the FBS. But like 25 points per game would have been like 85th overall. So they're not like, I mean, they're just begging this man to take their money. They're like, please, like we're begging you to take these bonuses. And it should happen. So what do you think plus 1,400 to win the conference?
Wow. I think they're just undervaluing this. I think they're basically just saying that, like, I mean, like you said yesterday, the East usually just wins the.
They've always won it. The West has never won a Big Ten championship game. Yeah.
No, I think the books are saying, like, historically it's gonna be Michigan or Ohio State to win that, and maybe they need to win it to get into the college football playoff. Who knows? But I mean, plus 1,400 for a future.
A little pizza money.
Not bad to just put, like, just a little sprinkle, a couple, maybe half a unit or like even a quarter unit on that one. Because I was just going to be, they're going to be a tough out. That's for sure. And they have a favorable schedule. So even if they get to that game, that, even if they get to the championship game, hypothetically, there's room to, maybe, what do you call it? By the other side, if you want.
Yeah.
I was looking for the word. My brain is at 10:30 in the morning, just doesn't work. There's room to hedge. So if you think they're going to make the Big Ten championship, and you're got a 14-1 ticket, you're sitting kind of pretty there.
Yeah. And by the way, we're about to get to Wisconsin. I know there's some people who say, "Hey, Wisconsin's won the Big Ten before." What are you talking about? The West has never won. When Wisconsin won the conference, that was in the immortal days of the Legends and Leaders divisions, when it was not East and West. Remember that, when the Big Ten, when they split initially, it was the Legends and Leaders. That was one of the really just saddest things in the history of college football.
Then you're just trying to figure out which one's which.
Yeah, I had no idea. It was terrible. Yeah, God, that was like one of those things that should have been dropped after 2 weeks, but kept it for a few years.
Yeah, you wait till they start moving teams from California into the Big Ten.
Yeah.
All right, next team we're going to talk about. Bryan alluded to it. Wisconsin Badgers on this one. Kind of a tough season for them. 7-6. They had the opportunity to make the Big Ten championship. Did not. Lost to Minnesota. 4-5 in the conference too. 18 starters back. 10 on the offensive side. 8 on the defensive side. Luke Fickell takes over as coach. You know what he did over in Cincinnati. And he gets a nice little favorable schedule as well. It's 59th toughest in the country. Couple, with a change in the coach, there's also change in the personnel. What do you think about Wisconsin this year, Bryan?
Well, this is going to be a much different looking Wisconsin team. I alluded to it earlier that it's going to the battle between Wisconsin and Iowa is going to come down to offense, and Wisconsin's going to look to throw the ball more than they've ever done before, because the offensive coordinator, Phil Longo, that they brought in from North Carolina, obviously that was one of the best passing attacks in the country last year. And here he's going to have a defense, unlike he had in Chapel Hill. And they bring in Tanner Mordecai as the quarterback. That name sounds familiar. He, of course, comes over from SMU, where he had a lot of success. It's going to be interesting to see what this Wisconsin offense can do. If this offense is really good, then Wisconsin is absolutely live, not just to win the division. They're the favorite to win the division, but I think they're live to win the conference as well. Now, they're only plus 600 to win the conference, so the books see there being a bit of a gap between Wisconsin and Iowa. I don't see that gap. I think it's going to be a 2-horse race, but I absolutely love Wisconsin to go over their season win total this year. I think this is going to be a very good football team, much like I like Iowa to go over their season win total. And I would sprinkle a little bit on Wisconsin to possibly win the conference. This is going to be a very good team. It's going to be a bounce back year. I know it's year one. It's a new regime, but with 10 starters back plus Mordecai on the offensive side of the ball, this may be the best offensive team we've seen out of Madison, maybe ever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can't deny the pedigree that is Wisconsin, and Luke Fickell has Big Ten pedigree. So it's not like it's his first time coaching in this conference, and coming over from Cincinnati, he rebuilt that program. I think he's going to do well here. You mentioned Tanner Mordecai. If anybody wants to know his stats, what he did over at SMU, He was also a transfer, I believe, from Texas when he came over. 65% pass completion rate, 33 touchdowns, 10 INTs over there last season with SMU. And that was kind of a hamstring for the Badgers last year, having to deal with Graham Mertz and his woes and his struggles. Having a quarterback that can actually move the football other than just handing the ball off, it's going to help this offense tremendously, especially with the transition to Luke Fickell. Running backs, not a concern. I love this kid, Braylon Allen. I've loved him for 2 years. He had a little bit of a regression last year just on the fact that it wasn't his fault. It was more of just the team transition and firing the coach. He had 1,284 yards, 5.4 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns for them last year. And also they have a great backup as well. So the dynamic of the running backs is still intact for Wisconsin. I mean, Braylon Allen was running over people when he was 17 years old. And I think he's going to have a great season here with Luke Fickell taking over. Wide receivers, they get their top 3 wide receivers back in Dyke, Bell, and Lewis. And they also add 3 quality transfers from the P5. So I think this is going to excel for the new offensive schemes that Luke Fickell's going to bring. Offensive line should be in good shape as well. 4 starters back, plus they add 2 transfers from Cincinnati with starting experience under Fickell. So on paper, this line can contend as one of the top lines in the country. That's Wisconsin's bread and butter, big farm boys, just steamrolling people. And I like to see that with Luke Fickell. Defensive line returns 5 out of their 6 top defensive linemen from last season. They had a few transfers to elevate the depth. This is a group that only allowed 2.9 yards per carry last year to rushers and put up 32 sacks, 8.5% sack rate. So great to hear that they're getting a lot of these guys back. Also, linebackers in good shape. 6 out of their 7 top linebackers are back, including their number 1 and number 2 tacklers. Defensive backs, they get 2 starters back, but they add some transfer help from Kentucky, UCLA, Utah, and Toledo. So a lot of turnover there, but they have a lot of productive experience to kind of help with that turnover. Toughest games for them, they have a revenge game against Washington State. I saw that on the board. They have to go to Washington State this year. They have a home game against Iowa, which helps them there. That should be a really good game. I'm looking forward to that one. And then they got to play Ohio State at home. That's going to be a tough one. And then they have to go on the road to Minnesota. I don't know if that's going to be tough, but those are the toughest games in their schedule. And I agree with you on the win total on this one. I see 8.5 out there. I think that's a perfect take on this one. This is another team that's going to win 9 or 10 games, no question, regular season. They're going to be contending with Iowa, in my opinion, for who's going to be representing the West in the Big Ten Championship. And if you do that, you have to have 9 to 10 wins going into that. And both of those teams are sitting at 8.5 wins. Plus, you don't have, I guess they have to play Ohio State. That's going to be a tough one, but they don't have to play Michigan. So I like what the first year for Luke Fickell is going to be an excellent one, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the only game where they're going to be a definite is against Ohio State, and that's at home, where they're very good. I mean, Madison's a tough place to win. You know, these road games that they have, you mentioned the one against Wazoo, it's a lot of revenge spots. So they're going to be up for those games. You know, it's a revenge spot against Minnesota. It's a revenge spot against when they have to go to Illinois. I don't see them losing, at Purdue again either. So I mean, when they've got all these revenge spots, I don't see them losing more than 2 games, to be honest with you. Certainly not more than 3, and that puts you over 8.5. I think, again, the numbers on these top 2 teams in this division are way too low. My favorite bets in the conference are over on these last 2 teams we talked about.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. And if we're talking going into the transition of the future picks, mine on this one, I told you one of them. I said I'm going to take a little gamble on the under on Minnesota. I'm going to take the over on Wisconsin, 8.5 wins, and I'm also going to take the over on Iowa, 8.5 wins. Those are my 3 plays for the win totals, and I wanted to take something on Northwestern, but it just wasn't available on the board. So that'll be something to look at to see it, depending on what happens with all the allegations that are out there. But those are my 3 picks: the over Iowa, 8.5 wins, over on Wisconsin, 8.5 wins, and the under 7.5 wins Minnesota. Bryan, you alluded to him, and I forgot to change the name again. Damn it. Power. All right. What are your picks?
We'll cover up the S there. No, it's all right. Yeah, I'm right with you. Over 8.5 on the 2. Like I said, Wisconsin, Iowa, and we'll throw in just as a little bit of a mix there. I talked about. I really, really like Nebraska, like a single game selection. This is not a. I know it says future picks, but I'll throw a curveball here. I really like Nebraska in week 2 against Colorado.
Oh, beautiful.
As a look-ahead game. So look to bet the Cornhuskers, particularly if they lose to Minnesota like we all think they will.
Yeah, and that's another thing, too, is probably early on in the season in Colorado games, they're probably going to be a little bit overvalued. So just maybe take a sniff at those lines to see if they're good spots. But Bryan mentioned Nebraska, and that's going to be something that we should circle on our boards for. Is it week 2? Week 2?
September 9th.
Week 2. All right. Before we close it out, I got to say, everybody that's been watching, make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the Sports Wagering Network and follow along. Like I said, I'm doing college football preview shows every Saturday and Sunday with a special guest. Like I said, I'm going to do Pac-12 next week with Mark Zeno from Sports Memo and everywhere across my television, anything to do with sports. I think he's even doing ESPN as well. So that is what's going to happen next week. So tune in for that. And that's it. And then just follow at GUNZPICKS on Twitter. Bryan, where can they find you? Take it away.
Wagertalk.com. As we record this, we are about ready to descend into the All-Star break. So it's a few days off for me, but it's not really a few days off. I'll be hosting a lot of shows. I'm not going to bring that up yet because I don't want to say something that doesn't wind up happening. But you're going to be seeing a lot more of me on the Wager Talk airwaves, I am sure. Moving forward in the second half of the baseball season and, of course, into the college football season as well, NFL. But, yeah, only place to find me is wagertalk.com. Look me up. Had a great first half of the baseball season, up 54.9 units since last year's playoffs. Woo! And college football was great as well last year. I think I mentioned it yesterday, number 1 with best bets. So looking to kill it again in 2023.
Yeah, and make sure you check him out on Twitter and follow him along at BryanPower_wins. And man, thanks for everybody that's been joining us. Whether you watch this video now, whether you watch it later, make sure, like I said, like and subscribe to the Sports Wagering Network. We're going to be giving content all football season long, NFL and college football. So thanks for joining us for this edition of the College Football Preview Show from GUNZPICKS. Till next time, when we break down the Pac-12, we say goodbye, good luck with your bets, and as always, let's keep dancing. Bang.